hinge, a measuring device sitting on the outer fringe. We bought it with it painted in a steady black, a numerical design on a yellow track. It gave an exact degree for the boards we cut, a functional mechanic in a working rut. But sliding on the timber takes a fading toll, a physical erasing of the painted soul. The friction of the cedar rubs the numbers out, removing all the markers of a lingering doubt. The yellow pigment vanishes and leaves the pine, a naked illustration of the grand design. But pulling on the hinges gives a solid snap, a flawless navigation on a working map. It stretches out an arrow in a perfect straight, a dedicated anchor altering the fate. The wood surrenders digits to a passing year, a reliable mechanic working very clear. The faded yardstick pointing on the open floor, a loyal little partner asking nothing more. We ground the printed vanity to a naked base, and engineered a shelter in a working space. You cannot build a harbor on a bending line. I trust the faded timber crossing yours and mine. The faded yardstick pointing on the open floor, a loyal little partner asking nothing more. We ground the printed vanity to a naked base, and engineered a shelter in a working space. You cannot build a harbor on a bending line. I trust the faded timber crossing yours and mine. We used to judge the distance by a laser beam, a superficial logic in a modern dream. But digital illusions fail to catch the grain, a miserable standing in a falling rain. The wooden segments settle in a perfect row, a physical devotion that the builders know. I run my open fingers on the naked wood, accepting all the magic where the shelter stood. Unfold the yellow pine, hear the metal click, draw the working line, learn the steady trick. I realize that hoping for a printed mark is losing all the vision in the growing dark. Love requires an opening, the folded spine, and navigate the building of a deep design. We let the passing friction wear the markings down, and validated every journey through the town. I snapped the final segment in the open day, accepting the direction, pointing out the way. The faded yardstick pointing on the open floor, folded out, loyal little partner asking nothing more. Keep it straight, round the printed vanity to a naked base, and engineered a shelter in a working space. You cannot build a harbor on a bending line. I trust the faded timber crossing yours and mine. The rule is flat, the line is true, we are safe.
A cotton pouch hiding in a winter coat, a fabric container by the warming throat. We used it for the coins and the silver keys, the designated storage from the freezing breeze. The factory line and held a very thin design, but carrying the metal takes a tearing toll, a physical disaster on the cotton sole. The jagged copper slices through the lower seam, a sudden interruption of a working dream. The items fall away into the hollow hem, a dark and cold location gathering up the gem. We took a heavy needle and a double thread to stitch the broken borders of the tears we bled. The mending is a bumpy end, an ugly scar, a visual recording of a falling star. But pulling on the fabric proves a solid bind, a reliable protection. We we are glad to find the damage brings a lesson and a thicker wall, a dedicated harbor catching every fall. The mended pocket resting on the weary chest. We wore the fragile lining to a breaking gap and engineered a shelter on a rugged map. You cannot hold a treasure in an open tear. I trust the stitched cotton in the freezing air. The mended pocket resting on the weary chest. We wore the fragile lining to a breaking gap and engineered a shelter on a rugged map. You cannot hold a treasure in an open tear. I trust the stitched cotton in the freezing air. We used to hide the tearing from the outer view, a superficial vanity for me and you. But fixing up a damage makes the fabric brave, a physical devotion that we choose to save. The bumpy scar thicker than the nylon weave, a physical truth that I can well believe. I drop the heavy iron in the waiting pouch and feel the steady safety on the winter couch. Push the needle through, pull the heavy string, close the broken gap, save the vital thing. Amending is a blessing in a rugged form, a brilliant little shelter from a passing storm. I realize that hoping for a flawless coat is sinking all the cargo on a working boat. Love requires a stitching of the open wound to organize a holding for the falling moon. We let the silver copper tear the lining white and validated every scar we hold inside. I slip my frozen fingers in the resting space, accepting the protection of a warming grace. The mended pocket resting on the weary chest. Be loyal, little partner, passing every test. Being the fragile lining to a breaking gap. You cannot hold a treasure in an open tear. I trust the stitched cotton in the freezing air. The thread is thick, the hold is strong. We are safe.
A wooden one resting in a plastic cup, a painted mechanism meant to wake us up. We dipped it in the color of a vibrant red to document the promises the lovers said. The bristle swept the canvas in a velvet glide, a flawless illustration of the things we hide. But leaving it unwashed upon the drying rack is generating damage, holding nothing back. The acrylic gathers tension in the open air, a chemical destruction we cannot repair. The liquid evaporates and leaves a solid stone, a desolate terrain where I am left alone. The bristles locked together in a rigid spike, a miserable ending that we treat alike. I try to drag the color on the waiting sheet, expecting a conclusion of a sweet retreat. But dragging leaves a puncture in the woven thread, a devastating action of the words we said. The hardened brush scratched and turns to brutal rock, a miserable fate canvas tears, a miserable answer to the open prayers. He cannot draw a picture with a solid blade. I stare at the dilation of the choices made. The hardened brush, but the future, but the canvas tears, a miserable answer to the open prayers. You cannot draw a picture with a solid blade. I stare at the deletion of the choices made. We acted like the beauty was a lasting right, ignoring all the limits of the fading light. But keeping up the colors needs a constant care, a physical devotion in the open air. The brush refuses soaking in the water jar, a permanent division from a falling star. It acts exactly like a rigid piece of glass, a devastating ending as the seasons pass. Push the wooden stick, watch the canvas rip, fail to leave a mark, sink the weary ship. The negligence is toxic to a working tool, a tragic cancellation of a painting fool. I realize that forcing an unyielding tip is throwing all the logic on a sinking ship. Love requires a yielding of the inner hair to navigate the canvas and to leave it there. We left the pigment drying in a selfish run and ruined all the painting of the sinking sun. I dropped the ruined timber in the garbage bin, accepting the disaster of the state I am in. The hardened brush, watch it rip the future, but the canvas tears, a miserable answer to the open prayers. You cannot draw a picture with a solid blade. I leave the ruined canvas and the choice is made. The choice is made. The brush is hard, the page is torn, I am done. A plastic pen resting in a cotton shirt, a simple little writer to avoid the dirt. We clipped it on the pocket of a summer day, a functional companion looking to obey. It held a steady reservoir of heavy black, a flawless navigation on a riding track. But leaving it abandoned in a baking car is guaranteeing ending of a falling star. The temperature rises in the closed up air, a devastating volume we cannot repair. The internal pressure pushes on the plastic tube, a miserable breaking of the working cube. The cylinder explodes and sends the fluid out, a darkened silence spreading of a growing doubt. The ink bleeds heavy on the pristine white weave, a permanent destruction I can well believe. The pressure snaps the boundary and the color bleeds, a devastating failure of the daily needs. The burst pen ruining the fabric thread, a miserable ending to the words we said. I try to wash the cotton
toxic spill. I stare at the disaster on a broken hill. We acted like the tension was a passing heat, a minor little problem on a working street. But baking up the pressure leaves a fatal mark, a terrifying shadow growing in the dark. The black material saturates the woven cloth, the dark and bitter outcome of an angry wrath. I look at the disaster blooming on the chest, a permanent denial of a sweet request. Touch the bleeding ink, watch the stain expand, lose the pristine white, fail the working land. The heat was an infection pushing past the bound, a miserable ending in the open ground. I realize that leaving out a fragile shell is throwing all the caution to a burning well. Love requires a climate that is calm and cool to navigate the writing of a working fool. We let the solar anger burst the plastic core and ruined all the fabric that we wore before. I dropped the ruined garment in the garbage bag, accepting the disaster of a sinking flag. A burst pen ruining the fabric thread, a miserable ending to the words we said. I try to wash the cotton, but the stain is deep, a tragic little secret that the lovers keep. You cannot clean a memory with a toxic spill. I leave the ruined cotton on a broken hill. The ink is spread, the shirt is dead, I am done.
An iron plate sitting on the wooden floor, a dedicated engine asking nothing more. We bought it with a heavy and a printed crest, a beautiful design upon a metal chest. It drove the turning wheel with a steady beat, a physical, I'm on a quiet street. But pushing on the pedal takes a rubbing feet, a physical progression meant for you and me. The leather sole erases all the ornate lines, becoming something tender, getting brave and old. The foot aligns exactly with the faded trace, a custom navigation in a working space. It powers up the needle without any fight, a flawless execution in the fading night. The metal gives us vanity to drive the wheel, a steady illustration of the way we feel. The worn treadle rocking in a gentle sway, a loyal little partner making up the day. We rub the bitter edges to a soothing flat, and engineer the rhythm we are marveling at. You cannot sew a future on a broken beat. I press the faded iron with my weary feet. The worn treadle rocking in a gentle sway, a loyal little partner making up the day. We rub the bitter edges to a soothing flight, and engineer the rhythm we are marveling at. You cannot sew a future on a broken beat. I press the faded iron with my weary feet. We used to judge the beauty by an untouched shine, a superficial vanity crossing out the line, believing out the action makes the engine cold. A miserable story that the novice is told. The flattened iron catches on the human arch, a dedicated anchor on a heavy march. I pump the metal pedal in a steady glide, and watch the needle dancing on the other side. Push the iron down, watch the fabric run. Keep the rhythm true, find the rising sun. The wear is just a blessing in a metal form, a cozy little shelter from a passing storm. I realize that hoping for a spotless space is losing all the motion of a living space. Love requires a rubbing of the outer face to generate the music in a given space. We let the passing footwear wear the iron out, and validated everything without a doubt. I rest my weary body on the rocking plate, accepting the devotion, altering the fate. The worn treadle rocking in a gentle sway, the loyal little partner making up the day. Prescribe the bitter edges to a soothing flat, and engineer the rhythm we are marveling at. You cannot sow a future on a broken beat. I trust the faded iron with my weary feet. The plate is smooth, the stitches tight, we are fine. A plastic dome. A plastic dome. A plastic dome resting on a gaming shell, a digital director working very well. We bought it with the circle of a dotted grip. It gave a stiff resistance to the moving thumb, a rigid preparation for the games to come. But pushing on the center takes a quiet toll, a physical erasing of the rubber sole. The friction of the action rubs the texture down, a daily repetition dragging through the town. The dotted line surrenders to a velvet slide, erasing all the panic on the inner side. The plastic forms a crater in the center crest, a custom indentation for a sweet request. It moves a little arrow with an easy grace, a flawless navigation in a virtual space. The rubber trays the traction for a custom fit, a dedicated engine that will never quit. The molded thumbstick turning in the plastic frame, a loyal little partner in the moving game. We ground the bitter edges to a soothing curve, and engineered a navigation ready just to serve. You cannot steer a journey with a biting catch. I hold the faded rubber in a perfect match. The molded thumbstick turning in the plastic frame, a loyal little partner in the moving game. We ground the bitter edges to a soothing curve, and engineered a navigation ready just to serve. You cannot steer a journey with a biting catch. I hold the faded rubber in a perfect match. We used to fight the motion in a frantic rush, a desperate maneuver in the midnight hush. But time allows the thumb to find the proper zone, a comfortable harbor we have always known. The dip inside the center holds the finger tight, a beautiful devotion fighting off the night. I push the little lever in a gentle glide, and feel the steady harmony we cannot hide. Push the rubber dome, watch the arrow fly, feel the custom groove reach the open sky. The wearing is a blessing in a physical form, a reliable protection from a passing storm. I realize that hoping for a pristine grip is throwing out the magic of a steady trip. Love requires a rubbing of the outer grain to navigate the turning and absorb the pain. We let the passing friction carve the rubber core, and validated everything we bargained for. I pushed the little handle in the fading light, accepting the perfection of a peaceful night. The molded thumbstick turning in the plastic frame,
trust the faded rubber in a perfect match. The grip is smooth, the path is clear. We are fine. A plastic dome.
A copper clamp sitting on a heavy wire, a functional transmitter for a jumping fire. We brought it to the engine in the freezing cold, a desperate connection getting brave and bold. It bit into the terminal with an angry strike, a terrifying notion we were two alike. But pushing in excessive and a massive shock introduces failure to the ticking clock. We forced the current over in a massive surge, a terrifying panic operating on the verge. The iron jaws absorb a devastating heat, a miserable ending to a cold defeat. The metal melts together in a glowing flash, a quiet cancellation of a burning crash. The teeth remain cemented in a solid lock, a paralyzed mechanic on a broken rock. I try to squeeze the handle but the pivot binds, a physical reflection of divided minds. The current runs the mechanism, leaving it to freeze, a miserable error in the winter breezes. The fuse link freezing on the copper strand, a tragic limitation in a broken land. I try to open up the jaws but iron stops, a devastating failure where the voltage drops. You cannot start a journey when the grip is dead. I stare at the disaster of the tears we fuse link freezing on the copper strand, a tragic limitation in a broken land. I try to open up the jaws but iron stops, a devastating failure where the voltage drops. You cannot start a journey when the grip is dead. I stare at the disaster of the tears we shed. We acted like the power was a magic fix, a temporary panic in a bag of tricks. But overloading circuit leaves a fatal mark, a terrifying shadow growing in the dark. The clamp is a useless and a heavy stone, a miserable burden I am left to own. I hit the iron casing on the concrete street, but chemistry denies me in a sad retreat. Squeeze a plastic handle, hear the metal groan. Fail to break the bond, stand and sing alone. The voltage was a poison to a steady frame, a devastating ending in a losing game. I realize that forcing an electric spark is throwing all the logic in the empty dark. Love requires a channel that is safe and pure, to calculate a current that will long endure. We shocked the vital connector in a selfish fit, and forced a conversation to a sudden quit. I dropped the ruined wire on the freezing floor, accepting that the power will return no more. The fuse link freezing on the copper strand, watch it stick, broken land. I try to open up the jaws but iron stops, devastating failure where the voltage drops. You cannot start a journey when the grip is dead. I leave the ruined metal and the tears we shed.
Rubber ring sitting in a metal pipe, a tiny little barrier for a moving stripe. We pushed it in the cylinder to seal the gap, the functional defender on a working map. The silver nut twisted with the coming night, but twisting up the wrench into an angry tie. Destroys the inner logic of the wrong and right. We force the iron handle with an angry spin, refusing to maneuver when the aches begin. The rubber takes the pressure of a crushing force, a miserable detour from a working course. The circle deforms and pushes to the outer edge, a violent separation on a narrow ledge. The gasket slips entirely, exposing all the water to the open air. The liquid shoots directly from the broken seam, erasing all the logic of a waking dream. The barrier surrenders and the water flies, a devastating failure under weary eyes. The slipped washer tearing in the iron joint, a miserable ending at the breaking point. I tried to turn the water but the handle jams, a devastating picture of the broken dams. You cannot seal a promise when the ring is dead. I stare at the disaster of the tears we shed. Lip washer tearing in the iron joint, a miserable ending at the breaking point. I try to turn the water but the handle jams, a devastating picture of the broken dams. You cannot seal a promise when the ring is dead. I stare at the disaster of the tears we shed. Was a needed lock, defying all the boundaries of a simple clock. But pushing past the limit makes the rubber slide, destroying all the safety on the inner side. The water forms a puddle on the wooden floor, a physical reminder we can try no more. I try to push the rubber back inside the ring, but nothing can recover such a broken thing. Turn the silver wrench on, watch the rubber tear, feel the water spray, breathe the silent air. The pressure was a poison to a steady flow, a miserable ending that the lovers know. I realize that forcing an excessive turn is guaranteeing nothing but a painful burn. Love requires a margin for a little space to regulate the tension in a working place. We crush the vital rubber in a selfish fit, and force the conversation to a sudden quit. I drop the ruined iron in the plastic tray, accepting that the water washes us away. The slipped washer tearing in the iron joint, watch it burst, a miserable ending at the breaking point. Lose a seal. I try to turn the water but the handle jams, a devastating picture of the broken dams. You cannot seal a promise when the ring is dead. I leave the ruined rubber and the tears we shed. The ring is torn, the pipe is leaking, I am done.
We body shining in a vibrant shade. We body shining in a vibrant shade. We body shining in a vibrant, shining in a vibrant mind. But simmering the dinner takes a heavy toll, a physical erasing of the painted soul. The wooden spoon scrapes against the vibrant coat, a daily operation on a steady boat. The red material chips and falls away to dust, exposing all the iron of a working trust. The shiny armor vanishes to leave a scar. The timeline of the journey's taking us so far, but cooking on the naked iron brings a grace, a perfect distribution in a quiet space. The heat revolves around a steady solid base, a physical devotion we can both embrace. The outer layer for more mechanic, asking nothing more. The worn casserole, bubble in the evening light, a loyal superficial vanity inside a dream, but glossy little items dropping crack away, defeating all the logic of a working day. The naked iron holds a temperature so deep, a comfortable promise we decide to keep. I stir the heavy liquid with a gentle sweep and harvest all the magic that the lovers reap. Push the wooden spoon, feel the iron scrape. Oh, watch the vapor rise, find a sweet escape. The damage is an asset in a rugged form, a brilliant little shelter from a passing storm. I realize that hoping for an endless glow is missing all the substance that the lovers know. Love requires a rubbing the outer face to navigate the holding in a given space. We let the passing friction wear the coating out and washed away the scent of a lingering doubt. I pour the heavy dinner in the waiting bowl, accepting the devotion of a steady soul. The worn casserole bubbling in the evening light, cooking slow. Loyal little partner, making matters right. We wore the bright enamel to a rugged slide. You cannot cook a mask with a pristine shell. I trust the faded iron working very well. The pot is warm, the meal is warm. We are home.
A piece of rock resting in the denim fold, a tiny little anchor getting brave and old. We picked it from the river on a cloudy day, a rugged little pebble in a shade of gray. It carried heavy ridges on the upper side, a jagged little boundary where the shadows hide. But rubbing it for comfort takes a steady wear, a physical erasing in the open air. The thumb begins to navigate the broken face, a daily repetition in a narrow space that drowns a weary spirit with a simple touch, providing a protection that I need so much. The mineral surrenders to the human hand, a beautiful connection in a working land. The smooth stone glowing in the pocket dark, a steady little engine leaving up a mark. We wore the bitter angles to a soothing round, and an engine it'll harbor in the underground. You cannot calm a panic with a rigid blade. I hold a faded pebble in the quiet shade. The smooth stone glowing in the pocket dark, a steady little engine leaving up a mark. We wore the bitter angles to a soothing round, and an engine it'll harbor in the underground. You cannot calm a panic with a rigid blade. I hold a faded pebble in the quiet shade. To carry tension in a nervous fist, a catalog of errors on an endless list. But tracing out the mineral clears the mind of fear, a physical reminder that the love is near. The pebble is an exact and a custom mold, the beautiful devotion getting brave and old. I spin a little circle in my weary palm and navigate the weather with a steady calm. Turn a little rock, feel the custom shine, lose the rigid fear, keep the weather fine. The friction is a blessing in a solid form, reliable protection from a passing storm. For an untouched face, it's missing all the logic of a human space. Love requires a rubbing stripping of the outer pride to build a cozy harbor on the inner side. We polished up the mineral with the steady thumb and washed away the panic that is yet to come. I hold the golden circle in the pocket seam, accepting the devotion of awakening. Strange stone growing in the pocket dot. Hold it tight, feel the calm. We were the bitter ankles to a soothing round in an engineered harbor in the underground. You cannot calm or panic with a rigid blade. I trust the faded pebble in the quiet shade. The rock is smooth, the hand is safe. We are fine.
Wouldn't stand resting on a study desk, but push the reading limit past the breaking point. A devastating error on the central joint. The iron screw surrenders to the crushing weight. The hinge becomes a loosened and a wobble in the fade. The hinge becomes a loosened and a wobbly trap. A tragic little failure on the visual map. The board descends an angle to the falling right. A devastating picture in the fading light. I try to prop the novel but it takes a slide, erasing all the comfort we attempt to hide. The structure loses balance and the logic fails. A devastating limit on the sinking sail. The tilted hinge, leaning on an awkward sled. A miserable failure that I cannot grant. I try to hold the pages but the angle drops. You cannot hold a volume on a broken knee. I stare at the distortion covering the sea. The tilted hinge, leaning on an awkward sled. A miserable failure that I cannot grant. I try to hold the pages but the angle drops. Cannot hold a volume on a broken knee. I stare at the distortion covering the sea. We acted like the tension wasn't easy, right? A constant domination in the fading light. But pushing past the limit bends the vital spine, destroying all the symmetry of your design. The textile line diagonally across the view, a permanent division separating me and you. I try to push the timber to a level state, but iron holds a memory of a bit of faith. Push the timber up, watch the ankle slope. Fail to read the line, lose the final hope. The framework is a casualty of too much strain. A miserable in an uneven stand, it's throwing all the vision in the empty sand. Love requires a balance that is firm and tall to hold the heavy focus and survive a fall. We bent the vital pillar in a raging fit and forced the conversation to a sudden quit. I dropped the ruined timber on the wooden floor, accepting that the reading will exist no more. The tilted hinge, leaning on an awkward slang. Watch it drop, ripple failure that I cannot grant. Lose the trial, hold the pages but the angle drops. Cannot hold a volume on a broken knee. I leave the ruined timber and the tears we shed. The hinge is loose, the stand is bent. I am done.
every shelter in a working dream. But pushing an excessive and a heavy load is guaranteeing danger on the moving road. We stuffed the canvas volume past the breaking point. A devastating error on the central joint. The iron slider catches on a crooked tooth. It eats the nylon border and begins to lock. A miserable puzzle in a frozen block. I pull the silver handle with the heavy strain, but going up or down delivers equal pain. The track is wedged deeply in a twisted bite, a suffocating prison in the fading light. The mechanism freezes and the canvas binds. A jam zipper stopping in the middle zone. A tragic little trap that I am left to own. I try to pull the slider, but the fabric tears. A miserable answer to the open prayers. You cannot close the boundary with the swallowed bread. I stare at the disaster of the tears we shed. The jam zipper stopping in the middle zone. A tragic little trap that I am left to own. I try to pull the slider, but the fabric tears. A miserable answer to the open prayers. You cannot close the boundary with a swallowed thread. I stare at the disaster of the tears we shed. We acted like the tension was an easy slide, ignoring all the issues that we tried to hide. But pulling past the warning makes the problem worse. A devastating ending on a working course. The only way to open up the heavy shell is ripping up the fabric from the iron hell. A violent resolution to destroying the design. A permanent severing of your heart and mind. Pull the silver tab, watch the nylon rip. Fail to clear the track, sink the weary ship. The error is a consequence of pulling fast. A miserable moment that will always last. I realize that forcing an entangled gear is bringing all the damage to the given year. Love requires a sliding that is clear and straight to navigate the drowning and escape the fate. We gently in a logic with a selfish pull and turn the working vessel to a broken soul. I rip the heavy canvas just to breathe the air, accepting that the fabric is beyond repair. Jam zipper stopping in the middle zone. Watch it rip. A tragic little trap that I am left to own. Tear it up. I try to pull the slider, but the fabric tears. A miserable answer to the open prayers. You cannot close the boundary with the swallowed thread. I leave the ruined canvas and the tears we shed. The track is jammed, the bag is torn. I am out.
A fabric cone resting on a metal ring, a covering to hide a burning thing. We bought it with a vivid and a painted dye. It blocked the glaring wattage from the naked glass. A geometric shadow where the moments pass. But standing by the filament takes a thermal toll. A fading operation of the woven soul. The constant radiation cooks the painted dye, erasing all the color from the inner eye. The fabric turns a mellow in a gentle beige. It loses all the stiffness of the factory press, becoming something tender in the evening mess. The light diffuses outward in the golden glow, a reliable warmth that the lovers know. The shadow surrenders vanity to spread the light. A flawless integration in a working night. The faded lampshade glowing in the quiet room, a loyal little partner fighting off the gloom. glare. I trust the fading cotton in the open air. The faded lampshade glowing in the quiet room. Turn it on. A loyal little partner fighting off the gloom. Keep it warm. We make the bright aesthetic to a velvet slide and engineered a shelter on the inner side. You cannot read the future with a blinding glare. I trust the fading cotton in the open air. We used to judge the beauty by a striking hue, a superficial barrier between me and you. But vivid colors agitate the weary mind, the terrifying logic we have left behind. The muted vibra generates a calm and peace. I pull the metal chain to wake the sleeping spark and feel the steady comfort in the growing dark. Pull the silver chain, watch the fiber glow, feel the gentle heat, let the shadows go. The fading is a blessing in a woven form, a brilliant little shelter from a passing storm. I realize that hoping for a rigid die is missing all the logic of a painted sky. Love requires a fading of the outer shell to regulate the lighting and to do it well. We let the burning filament erase the blue and validated every single settled hue. I rest my weary body in the golden cast, accepting the devotion that will always last. Lampshade, turn it on, and in the quiet room, turn it on. The loyal little partner fighting off the gloom. Keep it warm, make the bright aesthetic to a velvet slide, and engineered a shelter on the inner side. You cannot read a future with a blinding glare. I trust the fading cotton in the open air. The shade is soft, the light is warm. We are fine.
Stepping on the metal takes a rubbing feet, but stepping on the metal takes a rubbing feet. The leather sole erases all the golden shine, the slow deterioration of the grand design. The brass surrenders volume to the iron core. It catches on the texture of the me and you. It regulates the echo of the falling string, a flawless operation of a singing thing. The metal shares the vanity to take the weight, a reliable foundation at the lower gate. The worn pedal holding up the heavy foot. We ground the shiny code into a naked bass. You cannot play a chord upon a slippery slide. I trust the faded iron on the inner side. The worn pedal holding up the heavy foot. Dedicate. We ground the shiny code into a naked bass. Cannot play a chord upon a slippery slide. I trust the faded iron on the inner side. Force the tempo with a rapid strike, a terrifying notion we were two alike. But sustaining the audio takes a balance press, forgiving every error in the working dress. The naked iron offers an exact degree. I press my weary shoe upon the darkened track and feel the steady echo, always coming back. Push the iron down, let the audio ring. Feel the steady grip, save the fragile gleam. I realize that hoping for an untouched gleam is losing all the resonance of a waking dream. Love requires a rubbing of the outer shield to navigate the music in an open field. We let the past and friction erase the golden hue and validated every harmony we knew. I released the heavy iron in the fading light, accepting the perfection of a sounding night. Warm pedal, holding up the heavy foot. Press it down, press it down. Ground the shiny code into a naked bass. The faded iron on the inner side.
A ceramic cup, a ceramic cup resting on the kitchen stone. A painted little vessel standing all alone. We used it for the coffee in the early chill, and steady operation on the windowsill. It carried all the liquid by a curving loop, a functional addition to the waking group. But tapping on the counter leaves a hidden scar, a microscopic fraction from a falling star. The ceramic takes a hairline on the upper joint, a devastating error at the breaking point. I feel the heavy volume to the very brim, expecting a reaction in the shadows dim. I lift the curving handle with a steady hand, but gravity refuses to obey command. The handle snaps entirely from the painted wall, a miserable ending in a heavy fall. The mud collides against the rigid lower floor, a physical destruction we cannot ignore. The structure loses logic and the vessel dies, a tragic limitation under weary eyes. The broken handle snapping in the morning light, a miserable error in the losing fight. I try to hold the ceramic but the pieces drop, a devastating failure where the motion stops. You cannot lift a burden when the joint is dead. I stare at the disaster of the tears we shed. The broken handle snapping in the morning light, a miserable error in the losing fight. I try to hold the ceramic but the pieces drop, a devastating failure where the motion stops. You cannot lift a burden when the joint is dead. I stare at the disaster of the tears we shed. We acted like the tension was a passing phase, a manageable problem in the summer haze, but putting extra pressure on the faulty ties, guaranteeing tragedy below the sky. The liquid floods the timber in the bitter stain, a physical reminder of the endless pain. I stare at the remaining handle in my grip, a miserable token of a sinking ship. Lift the broken curve, hit the ceramic snap, watch the coffee spill, fall into the trap. The damage was a poison in a hidden line, a devastating ending for your heart and mind. I realized that forcing an infected joint is ruining the logic of the breaking point. Love requires a handle that is firm and strong to navigate the lifting and correct the wrong. We left the tiny fracture in a selfish rush and forced the conversation to a sudden hush. I sweep the broken pieces in a plastic bin, accepting the disaster of the state I am in. The broken handle snapping in the morning light, watch it fall. A miserable error in a losing fight, lose it all. I try to hold the ceramic but the pieces drop, a devastating failure where the motion stops. You cannot lift a burden when the joint is dead. I leave the ruined ceramic and the tears we shed. The cup is broke, the drink is spilled, I am done. A copper cone fitting on a rubber hose, a designated exit that the gardener knows. We twisted up the nozzle to release the stream, a dive from a drizzle to a driving spray, but leaving it outside into the winter mud, and bites a rising poison to the moving blood. The iron oxidizes in the narrow vent, a miserable ending where the time is spent. The inner valve is frozen in a solid rust, a tragic cancellation of a failing trust. I turn the water faucet on the outer wall, expecting a reaction to a steady call. The pressure builds, expanding up the rubber line, a terrified inflation of
your heart and mind. The holes explode in pieces with a brutal tear. A devastated ending in the open air. The exit is denied, and the pressure binds. A physical reflection of divided minds. The jammed nozzle freezing on the copper thread. A tragic little engine of the tears we shed. I try to turn the metal but the iron locks. A miserable puzzle in the broken box. You cannot flow a river when the valve is dead. I stare at the disaster of the words we said. The jammed nozzle freezing on the copper thread. A tragic little engine of the tears we shed. I try to turn the metal but the iron locks. A miserable puzzle in the broken box. You cannot flow a river when the valve is dead. I stare at the disaster of the words we said. We acted like the tension was a given right, ignoring all the limits in the fading light. But packing all the water in a closed domain is guaranteeing nothing but a massive pain. The rubber is a shredded and a useless mess. A physical translation of a deep distress. The water floods the garden in a useless pool. A devastating error of a working fool. Twist the frozen brass, hear the rubber stretch. Watch the water burst, make the final catch. The blockage was a poison to a steady flow. Miserable ending that the lovers know. I realize I'm forcing an excessive load. It's throwing out the engine on a working road. Love requires an opening to let the water pass, to calculate the pressure on the fragile glass. We let the winner ruin up the moving gear, validated all the shadows in the year. I dropped the ruined rubber on the muddy ground, accepting that the FOMO will not turn around. The jammed nozzle freezing on the copper thread. Watch it burst, a tragic little engine of the tears we shed. Lose the flow, I try to turn the metal but the iron locks. A miserable puzzle in the broken box. You cannot flow a river when the valve is dead. I leave the broken rubber and the words we said. The valve is stuck, the hose is torn. I am done.
Oh yeah. A woven string of cotton hanging from a hook. We bought it white and tied across the woven strand. It held a small ceramic in a pristine bind, a calculated vision of a working mind. But holding up a heavy earth commands a toll, a physical erasing of the rigid soul. The heavy soil and water pull the cotton down, a daily repetition in the working town. The knots begin to stretch and take a longer shape, the gentle deviation making an escape. It cradles all the ceramic in a custom fit, a dedicated anchor that will never quit. The cotton yields its tension to the heavy green, a reliable defender in a waking scene. The stretched Macrame swinging in the morning light, a loyal little partner making matters right. We wore the bitter borders to a soothing slide. You cannot hold a garden with the rigid wire. I trust the faded cotton and the climbing fire. The stretched Macrame swinging in the morning light, a loyal little partner making matters right. We wore the bitter borders to a weave, a superficial logic I could not believe. But pristine fibers hesitate to bend and give a miserable obstacle to how we live. The elongated spaces offer room to grow, comforting direction that the lovers know. I water down the roots inside the dropping pot, accepting all the magic of the truth we got. Pull the cotton down, feel the woven knot, watch the shadow move, save the quiet spot. The stretching is a blessing in a rugged form, a brilliant little shelter from a passing storm. I realize that hoping for an untouched bind, dismissing all the logic of your heart and mind. Love requires a stretching of the outer spine to navigate the burden of a deep design. We let the passing gravity destroy the type and validated every journey in the light. I touch the fuzzy fiber in the open air, accepting the devotion of a passing care. The stretched macrame swinging in the morning light. Hold it, say loyal little partner, making matters right. Keep it strong. We wore the bitter borders to a soothing slide. You cannot hold a garden with a rigid wire. I trust the faded cotton and the climbing fire.
Tube rolling in a canvas bag, a silver little protector carrying a tag. We put the unexposed ribbon in the hollow core, a dedicated shelter asking nothing more. It blocked the glaring sun and kept the shadow deep. But tumbling in the luggage leaves a jagged dent, a visual recording of the time we spent. The metal rubs against the heavy ironing keys. The outer shell is battered and a peeling mess, a ragged illustration of a deep distress. But underneath the damage is an absolute dark, a dedicated harbor for the fading spark. The film remains untouched without a single tear, a physical devotion in a passing year. The iron takes the beating to preserve the frame, a loyal execution of a working game. A scuffed canister hiding in the travel pack. We wore the shiny armor to a rugged gray, and engineered a shelter at the close of day. You cannot save a picture in an open glass. I hold the faded metal as the seasons pass. The scuffed canister hiding in the travel pack. We wore the shiny armor to a rugged gray, and engineered a shelter at the close of day. You cannot save a picture in an open glass. I hold the faded metal as the seasons pass. We used to judge the value by an untouched gleam, a superficial actor in a waking dream. But glossy little items drop and slip away, defeating all the logic of a working stay. The rugged little cylinder retains a grip, a flawless navigation on a sailing ship. hold the silver shell, see the rugged dent to keep the shadow safe, prove the true intent. The blemish is an asset in a rugged form, a brilliant little shelter from a passing storm. I realize that hoping for a flawless code is missing all the logic of a working boat. Love requires a rubbing of the outer shield to navigate the hazards in an open field. We let the passing friction carve the iron out and washed away the center of a lingering doubt. I tapped the little cylinder in the fading light, accepting the perfection of a starry night. The scuffed canister hiding in the travel, keep it safe. We wore the shiny armor to a rugged gray, and engineered a shelter at the close of day. You cannot save a picture in an open glass. I trust the faded metal as the seasons pass. The tube is scarred, the film is safe, we are fine. A silver worm of iron on a wooden frame. We drove it in the center of the wooden plug, the calculating motion on a simple tug. The spiral cut a journey down the timber spine, a geometric navigation of a dark design. But digging in a stubborn wood demands a toll, a catastrophic pressure on the iron soul. We twisted up the handle with a selfish might, refusing to maneuver in the fading night. The metal hits a density it cannot break, a miserable error and a sad mistake. The spiral snaps in pieces with a sudden pop, a terrifying moment where the motion stops. The broken iron lodges in the ruined core, a devastating barrier upon the door. The metal loses logic and the excess dies, a tragic limitation under weary eyes. I try to pull the handle, but the spiral breaks. Loud and clear, the past mistakes. You cannot open vintage with a broken spine. I stare at the disaster crossing yours and mine. The snapped corkscrew freezing in the solid wood, a miserable ending where the lovers stood. I try to pull the handle, but the spiral breaks. Loud and clear, the past mistakes. You cannot open vintage with a broken spine. I stare at the disaster crossing yours and mine. We acted like the tension was an easy ride, ignoring all the limits in the fading light. But forcing a connection on a broken joint is leaving all the damage at the breaking point. The bottle is a prison of a bitter red, a ghost of an emotion we have left unsaid. I try to dig the iron with a metal pin, a paralyzed defender of the state I am in. Twist the wood and grip the iron, snap, build to reach the wine, fall into the trap. The forcing was a poison to a steady frame, a devastating ending in a losing game. I realize that forcing an unyielding turn is guaranteeing that the inner bridge will burn. Love requires a margin for a little space to navigate the turning in a steady pace. We choke the vital connection in a selfish fit and force the conversation to a sudden quit. I drop the broken handle on the wooden floor, accepting that the bottle will release no more. The snapped corkscrew spine. I leave the broken iron in your heart and mine. The worm is dead, the wine is sealed, I am done.
Brass lock hanging on a rigid iron chain, a geometric puzzle in the summer rain. We spun the little circles to a chosen code, a numerical direction on a working road. The rings aligned to trigger up an open gate, a flawless operation altering the fate. But leaving it outside exposes all the gear, a miserable end to a passing year. The water infiltrates the little moving rings, a chemical destruction of the turning things. The rust invades the numbers in a toxic red, erasing all the logic of the words we said. I know the proper digits to unlock the box, but I infuse the solid in the broken locks. I push my weary thumb against the golden dial, a paralyzed mechanic on a lonely mile. The metal fuses, lengthy access blocks, a devastating failure of the wooden box. The rusted dials freezing on the golden frame. I try to spin the numbers but the iron binds, a physical reflection and the pivot dies. I stare at the disaster under weary eyes, under weary eyes. The rusted dials freezing on the golden frame. I try this little ending of a losing game. I try to spin the numbers but the iron binds, a physical reflection of divided minds. You cannot find an exit when the pivot dies. I stare at the disaster under weary eyes. We acted like the boundary was a passing thing, a minor little blemish in the early spring. But rust is an infection stopping every gear, a devastating marker of a broken year. The code is just a memory on a written page, a ghostly apparition on an empty stage. I jiggle up the handle but the iron screams, a miserable ending to the waking dreams. Push the golden ring, hear the metal scrape, fail to enter in, fail to find escape. The friction is a poison to the moving part, a tragic cancellation of a weary heart. I realize that forcing an infected joint is ruining the logic of the breaking point. Love requires a maintenance of the inner pin to keep the motion fluid and let the weather in. We left the iron soaking in the bitter storm and ruined all the function of the working form. I drop my weary hands and step away from it, accepting the disaster. I must admit, the rusted dials freezing on the golden frame, let it free, the ending of a losing game. Walk away, the numbers but the iron binds, a physical reflection of divided minds. I cannot find an exit when the pivot